a new California gun law is dashing the dreams of an Olympic hopeful, plus a conversation with Walk the Talk America about gun suicide prevention. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload podcast.
I made the devil run. I gave him poison just for fun.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also the founder of thereload.com, where you can pick up a membership today if you want to support our sober, serious reporting and you want exclusive access to hundreds of members-only pieces. We've got analysis and reporting over there behind our members section, but you can also check out what we are, what we do, how we operate by signing up for our free newsletter, which comes out every Friday morning. Gives you a nice roundup of the news. You don't have to spend a lot of time to get caught up on what's happening in guns in America that week. It's a great way to keep up to date. And most of our reporting is free for everyone. So head on over to thereload.com and sign up for that today. This week, we are talking about firearms suicides and suicide prevention. And we have with us Mike Sodini, who is the founder of Walk the Talk America. Welcome to the show, Mike. Can you tell people a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Stephen. My background is I'm a third generation firearms industry professional who in 2009, I lost the president of my distribution company, my importing company, which was Eagle Imports, to suicide by firearm. And in 2018, I got an opportunity to create Walk the Talk America, which was just a complete pivot from what I was doing. Obviously, being an importer of firearms and selling them, building brands in the United States such as Bursa, Grand Power, Metro Arms, SPS, to working in suicide prevention and trying to solve the best we can some of the negative outcomes of firearms. 2018 is when I started that. Here we are, like 4 years later, and I could never imagine that I'd be here now working in this space. So it's a little brief history.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is obviously an extremely important topic. Traditionally, about 2/3 of gun deaths in America are suicides, not murders. This is something we talk about a lot in the political landscape because oftentimes you'll hear advocates for stricter gun laws conflate suicides and murders as though they sort of lump them together into gun deaths. And it's important to understand the components of gun deaths and that gun suicides are actually a major driver of gun deaths in America. And it's important to understand that issue because it's something that's been with us for a very long time. And it's something that I think the gun owning community, the gun industry have put more effort into as of the last several decades here, into prevention, into trying to find ways to bring down the suicide rate and to help those who are having suicidal ideation, people who are gun owners and who might be not responsive to other forms of intervention, but might have, there might be more of a chance that you could reach them with a program like yours. So why don't you just give us a quick overview of your program just to start off with here?
Okay, so I'm going to rewind to before I started this. When it came to the concept, right? When it was a night I was out with one of my national sales managers, and someone had asked a simple question. Right, we were talking about mass shootings, and we were with this lady, and she said, "Hey, like, what's the deal with the firearms industry when there's a mass shooting? What happens?" And I was like, "Well, contrary to what you think about us cheering, we actually don't." And I said, "It's not a good look for us. We can't stand it as an industry. There's a lot of factors to it, more than just the tragedy, right?" And I said, "What happens is then everyone blames us for it. We blame mental health, and then nothing ever happens." So she asked this one question. She goes, "Hey, if you understand that it's a mental health thing, how do you work with the mental health community to find solutions you can agree on?" And that just changed my whole life. Now, what I originally wanted to do with the concept because my national sales manager turned to me. He's like, yeah, we should really be giving $1 a gun to mental health. Like he just said it as like a blanket statement, right? So I originally just wanted to throw money at the situation. I thought, well, here's a cool concept. What if I were to get like Ruger and I was to go Arms Corps and High Point and all these companies that I had relationships with, that being in the firearms industry? What if we started supporting some mental health initiatives? Once again, just throwing money at the problem, right? Being like, hey, you guys handle it, but here we are, right? Would they take our money? Like the mental health community takes money from Big Pharma. The mental health community would clearly take money from us. But what really was the eye opener for me was when I would reach out, I'm going to say across the aisle, right? But it's really not an aisle. And there, just like the gun industry has a lot of nuance, so does the mental health community. But when I reached out and said, look, I want to fund any kind of programs you have for outreach that would maybe stop mass shooters and potentially work on some suicide stuff, they pretty much were telling me, you need to focus on suicide prevention. This is the mental health side of things telling me that. And every person that I talked to, every doctor, every clinician, every important person that I was able to get a hold of in the very beginning, they all steered me back to suicide prevention, because finding the next mass shooter is like finding a needle in a haystack. And they're the ones that told me that. And they told me why we should focus on suicide prevention is because if you can get to people early enough, cast such a wide net, get upstream to try to prevent the unpredictable, you might catch that next mass shooter early on in the process, right? But the true, issue that we need to focus on is suicide by firearm. And when it took me a while to get my head around that, but then someone put it to me in a way that I repeat it every time I talk, every time I'm speaking at a speaking event or I'm on a podcast or a radio show. We had 59 people. I'm in Vegas right now, down Mandalay Bay, down the street. We had 59 people die on an October 1 tragedy. Everybody knows about that. It's one of the worst mass shootings ever. We have 67 people that take their life with a firearm a day, right? So we have a October 1 mass shooting every single day, and the news doesn't cover it. People that have bad intentions when it comes to firearms and maybe anti-gun, they like to lump that number in total gun deaths, like you had mentioned earlier. And really, when you do that, the focus goes away from the real problem. So what we look for is root cause mitigation. What we try to do is find innovative ways that we can get people the help they need when they're in crisis without fear of consequence, right? To make Earth better, to make their mental state better, and maybe save their lives. And what we realize is that the firearm can be a symbol of a place where someone can go to actually use as a resource to get help. It doesn't have to just represent what it does to us: freedom, protection, protecting your family, right? Now we can also say, like, we could take this valuable space and make it so people know that they can go and get help from a trusted source that's not going to, cause them to lose their firearms rights. I mean, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I think you make a very important point there. I mean, the numbers here are really relevant to this discussion because, mass shootings in America get a lot of attention, and you can understand why. Obviously, they're very shocking events. They're horrible. People have a hard time understanding the motivations or how someone could do that. So it becomes, a more a topic of greater interest because people want to maybe try to. Anytime something is confusing or mysterious, it's going to garner a little more attention. Whereas people can I think on a base level, have a better understanding or can better relate to somebody who has suicidal ideation. And so it's less of a mystery why those happen, but clearly it's much more of the problem when you're talking about gun deaths in America. You reduce the number of gun suicides, that's where you're going to have your greatest percentage impact because they make up so much of the gun deaths in America. And so, you said there that you reached out to some, mental health professionals looking for ways to just initially just to throw money at the problem. But what was it exactly that led you to create an entire program? I mean, so it sounds like there wasn't necessarily something that was specifically designed with gun owners in mind when it comes to, off-ramping somebody from these suicidal ideations.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Looking back on it now, in the beginning, I was super naive, and I just was super excited about the possibility of the firearms industry for once stepping up and doing something, right? And then when I kind of discovered that there's no team out there on the mental health side or plan on the mental health side to kind of combat suicide by firearm, like they don't have the answers. It was a very depressing day for me, because I had to go back and talk to my board of directors and actually say, like, there's nothing for us to fund. We'd be just handing over money to mental health. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, especially if you have an organization that you like. But one of my board members actually made a great point, Rob Pincus, and he goes, hey, anybody could just hand money over to mental health. Like, what are we doing here? That forced me to look inside of the organization and also the firearms industry and say, like, okay, let's get creative here. What can we do to get people the help they need? But maybe we have to come up with the programs. Maybe the mental health side has the tools and the resources, right? So one of the very first things I did was I created the mental health flyer, the screenings, right? So I started putting them in the boxes of my firearms just to see how it would go. I wanted to see how customers react to it. I wanted to see how the industry would react to it, right? I didn't know if NSSF or NRA would be like, Mike, what are you doing? Right. So this mental health screening flyer leads to 13 different categories of mental health screenings. You don't have to be in crisis to take a screening. You can go on there. It's free and anonymous. I thought that's perfect. Right. Now, this is something that Mental Health America had already offered to the world. My thing was, let's just take it a step further and directly send it to gun owners. That's what my thinking was in the box, putting it in the firearms box. So you can go there, you check yourself out. And then depending on where you fall, like, for example, there's a screening for anxiety. There's one for depression. There's one for substance abuse. Maybe you have mild anxiety. Okay. Maybe you have high anxiety, but there's ways to mitigate that. And the resources are there after you take the screening. So that was my first thought. But here's the other thing. It's like, I didn't want it to me, like, you know how people are. It's like, okay, there's a manual. Is anyone going to read it? They see something in the box. Are they just going to toss it out? I wanted for the first time, like, gun owners to say, like, to see something about mental health coming from us, right? Like, mental health. And if you read the card, and people can go on the website and see the card, but it says mental health. It's okay to talk about it, right? And it says Walk the Talk America is made of gun people who want to help other gun people. And what we found was that we were getting phone calls from our customers that, would call Eagle Imports, and they're literally like, I just bought a Bursa the other day, and I opened it up and there was a screening in here, and they're like, just thank you. I mean, the response was super positive, right? And I kind of had suspected that that's what it would be, because being that I've been in this industry so long, and this, I mean, we met at the NRA show, right? You could walk around any firearms show, whether it's SHOT Show, NRA show, and you will find a huge amount of first responders, vets, active duty military, right? People that their livelihood relies on firearms. And that was one of the things that I always felt that got lost in the mix when we get into the fights with the anti side, right? When they were all talking about gun violence. And it's like, yeah, suicide impacts our industry so much. I mean, clearly it impacted me, like, in a huge way. I lost the president of my company in 2009. But, to me, I was like, okay, I think it's time for the firearms industry to have an outlet for gun owners to be like, yeah, we care about this too, right? We're always so on the defensive just because of the things that we're labeled, the things that we're called, how we're misunderstood. I think sometimes you can lose sight of what are the things we can do to actually bring this number down. And I'm not here to say that Walk the Talk America is going to be responsible for bringing down suicide completely, right? I don't know that. And people always ask me, Mike, why do you focus on the firearm? Because I'm from the firearms industry, right? If I worked in rope, maybe it would be a different story, or pharmaceuticals, it would be a different approach. But what I want to do is put ourselves in a position as an industry to say we are doing almost more than everybody else to tackle this issue.
Yeah, and I can sympathize with your situation there as well. I lost a close friend to suicide as well. Bob Owens,
Yeah.
He was the founder of Bearing Arms. A lot of people in the industry know him and loved him. as did I. And unfortunately, he had his personal struggles and committed suicide with a firearm several years ago. And yeah, I mean, when you've gone through that experience, I think you can have a better understanding of why it's so important for everyone, regardless of whether you're in the industry or not, or your political outlook on guns, to be interested in preventing these sorts of incidents and these kinds of deaths, because they are just that, preventable. In many cases, people can be helped, and I think it's important for the gun owning community, to find ways to help, because I think there is, and I think one of the points you're getting at here is you have a unique ability as a gun owner, as someone in the industry, to reach a gun owner who might be struggling with suicidal ideation, and might be able to make a difference in a way that somebody who isn't a gun owner, or somebody in another sector of the mental health field might not be able to reach them, especially given concerns around, as you mentioned earlier in the show, the idea that if I talk about this, someone's going to want to take my guns away from me. And so I'm interested, one, in your approach to that problem, right? That is, I imagine, something that comes up when you're dealing with gun owners who may have suicidal ideation, but also may be reluctant to tell anyone.
Yeah, it's been a real interesting journey and an eye opener, right? Because you have 50 different states that have 50 different rules on these things. Some states actually are worse than others, way worse than others. So you take, for example, like, let's just use New York as an example. New York has the SAFE Act. It's not that safe. Like, what they think they're doing to get people help is actually a deterrent to get people help, because so many people, if you go in there and you just say, I have anxiety, there's a very good chance that you will lose your rights. That's been one of the great things about Walk Talk America is over the 4 years, as it's grown in popularity amongst the gun community, is that people reach out to us. When they're unsure, they reach out to us. Many times they're in a situation where they're okay. They could go get help, and we can reassure them of that. Right. And because the law can be spooky, like, especially when, a law is talked about like it's all encompassing for all 50 states, right? Not every state is New York, right? And Nevada is a completely different scenario. But one of the things that we have been doing that we're really proud of too, is we have a cultural competence course for mental health clinicians where we give CEU credits for them to come through and take the course. It's a 3-part course. But one of the great things, just like we educate firearms owners on the mental health process and destigmatize it, and, the counseling process, we do the exact same thing for counselors. There are a lot of clinicians, just like you had mentioned, there's a lot of people that probably want to help, but they don't know how to reach gun world, or they don't understand it, right? So we throw these courses. We've had, just in the state of Nevada alone, we've had over 1,000 people come through these courses that are clinicians. Some of them were probably, we've had them tell us, hey, I was anti-gun before I took this course. Now I'm totally changing the way I think, or now I'm gun neutral, right? That's what we want. We want people to understand the fear that gun owners have. And I've watched clinicians do mental gymnastics in these courses. It's kind of interesting, especially when you're there live. Like, we have the third part of our courses actually takes place on a range where people are actually firing the firearms and getting to touch and feel them. And we've had these roundtable discussions where I've watched these clinicians literally go, I'm trying to think of how I could take somebody's gun, even if I wanted to. Right. And that was a real eye opener for me to see that not all clinicians are here to take your firearms or can take your firearms. Obviously, if you go into any, clinic and you start saying really bizarre things, there you might have an issue. But just, teaching clinicians that going to a range and shooting off 1,000 rounds because you had anxiety is a normal thing. For you and I, we're like, oh, that's it. You only shot 1,000. Oh, that's interesting. But for a clinician who doesn't understand gun culture, that could be a real eye opener. Right. And that's what we got to break down. Right? We have to normalize guns. Guns are normal. People use them in everyday life. Right. So.
Yes, guns are normal, and normal people use guns, as Professor David Yamani likes to say. We had him on the show a little while back. But yeah, I think that's a really good point, about the not just educating gun owners, but also educating mental health professionals in gun culture or the basics of gun ownership and what is a warning sign and what's not. Because you're right. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot like media coverage, right? When you hear about someone having an arsenal, right. And usually it's like they had a couple guns and a couple hundred rounds of ammunition, which is really not abnormal whatsoever in gun ownership terms. But to somebody who doesn't know anything about firearms, certainly I'm sure sounds like a lot of rounds. And so, yeah, going to the range and shooting a couple hundred rounds of ammunition is not something I think most gun owners would look at as out of the ordinary whatsoever. But if you don't know anything about guns, perhaps a clinician might. And it's important to understand those distinctions, right? I guess that's what part of what you teach them.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I think it's important for them to know. It's important to them to know. So one of the programs that we have too is we fly in to SHOT Show because we always have a booth at SHOT Show. NSSF donates a booth to us, and we always have a presence at the NRA show. And what we do is we actually bring clinicians in from pretty powerful positions, other organizations outside. We will always pay for them to come and learn. And it's a slow process, right? Because I think about how I got into firearms. I got in through nepotism. So my grandfather owned Eagle Imports. When I came out of college, I was basically told, look, you're going into firearms business. You're coming to work with us. And it's a blessing. Trust me. I would rather, there's no other way I'd want to do it. But for me, because they didn't, being from New Jersey, me growing up in California and Jersey, I wasn't around firearms. I didn't grow up around them. So all the things I learned was being immersed in the firearms community. Because I'll be honest, when I first got into the firearms industry in 98, I didn't really understand why it was problematic to not, why can't we give up ARs? I didn't say that out loud, but I had this I had to learn, and I had to build trust with people to where I can ask what I would say these maybe question that you'd be afraid to ask. And I feel like that's where we really can make a difference is bringing in people, gaining them to trust us and showing them. And it's not like I show you one time and you totally get it, right? A lot of times people need that repetition. So I love the fact that Walk Talk America has kind of become this home base for many outside of the industry to call and say hey, I'm thinking about backing this legislation. Why is this a problem? Explain it to me again. I know you explained it to me one time before, but I've completely forgot. Right. And then I could take them and walk them through why this ban is not going to do anything or what kind of problem it's going to cause amongst the 2A crowd. Right. Our worlds, the world that you and I walk in, is completely different than most, right? I don't know how many times you've probably seen statistics. 70% of gun owners say that they're for this type of restriction. And you're like, no, you're not asking the people that we hang out with.
Right, sure.
Because there's no way it's 70. I would say it's almost 0. Or the people are lying to you. It's one or the other, right? My world is completely different than say, someone that works in suicide prevention in New York City's world is, it's a completely different world and it's a completely different audience.
Right. But Walk the Talk America is at least in part about building, bridges between those two worlds of mental health professionals and gun owners. I mean, obviously there's going to be some crossover there already because I'm sure there are many mental health professionals who are gun owners. In the United States, it's, as we've just mentioned, it's a very normal thing here for people to own firearms of all walks, all types of people. But it's important to have that institutional connection, I guess, is what you guys are facilitating, really.
And I'm glad you brought that up because it's perfect segue into something I wanted to mention anyways. So one of the things that we're working on now is we're building an affiliate network of clinicians that are pro 2A. or 2A friendly. And we have a process where we obviously vet the clinician and they have to take our cultural competence course, but we want to build that database, because what's been happening over the last 4 years is that people contact Walk Talk America and they're like, okay, I'm ready to talk to somebody, or my friend needs somebody and they don't want to go get help. They want to make sure that they go to somebody that's not going to judge them because they own a firearm. And then we end up having to look for that. So it's just a natural evolution of Walk Talk America. We're already almost over, we don't get paid for anything, but like we're a referral system, right? And if we don't have somebody that has a connection to some certain area, we have to find it. But one of our board members, and I think he'd be a great guest one time, is named Jake Wiskerson. And he is a licensed clinician in Nevada. And how we met is he had a show called Noggin Notes, which is a podcast about mental health. It was the very first show outside of the gun industry or the 2A community that had invited me on and said, hey, like, tell us about Walk Talk America. Well, we developed a relationship. We stayed in touch. But one of the interesting things about Jake was, before I went on the show, he said to me, like when we were doing the warm up, he said, hey, look, I have a concealed carry license and I'm a gun owner, but we can't talk about that on the show. And I was like, okay, that's fine. I'm not going to make someone talk about it if they're not comfortable with it. Well, as time went by, he realized, like, he'll say this, I had to come out of the closet as a gun owning clinician because I really liked what Walk Talk America was doing. And I was like, I want to be one of the first ones that steps forward and says, it's normal. I'm a gun owning clinician. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to encourage clinicians to come forward to say, advertise just like they would. Hey, we're LGBTQ friendly. We're little people friendly. We're airline pilot friendly. We're single mom friendly. There needs to be a category that says we're 2A friendly. It just makes sense.
Yeah. So if someone comes to you guys and they're struggling and they'd like to, talk to a professional, seek help as is the right thing to do in a situation like that, but they're worried about, well, if I tell the clinician how I really feel, maybe they'll take my guns away from him, and that's not the solution I'm looking for. I don't, that's something that would keep me away from talking to a professional. You can refer them to somebody who is less likely to come to that outcome, right? That's the idea, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly what we want to do, because we're already in that situation now. We're already in that situation where people are like, okay, I'm interested in talking to someone, or, we'll get the questions like, hey, do I have to disclose this if I go talk to somebody in the VA? Right? Like, those are things that, and once again, like, if I had $1 for every time we get, it's almost daily. I worked on one today for an hour, trying to find somebody for somebody. We wouldn't have to go out and try to raise money. I mean, it's a huge fear that gun owners have. And it's something that I think the clinical world has kind of skipped over, and to be fair to clinicians, I've seen, that's another thing I've seen in the classes. I've literally seen clinicians, you could tell the look on their face. They're like, wait a minute, I didn't even realize people were afraid to come talk to us because of that. I didn't even know that was a thing. And it's like, yes, the fear of losing your 2A rights is way more important than you think it is for others.
Yeah.
And they need to understand that.
Yeah. I think that's something that doesn't get discussed as much as it should in these sorts of conversations about, gun suicides, because it is a huge factor. And, it's one of the top criticisms of something like, red flag laws, where one of the things they're most commonly used for is people who have suicidal ideation, to take their guns away from them. And it's also one of the top criticisms of those sorts of laws, that people might not seek out help because of that is a real possibility for one of the outcomes. And beyond just the rights aspect to it, there's also an embarrassment aspect to it. I think for a lot of people, right, that you'll hear, like, if you have your home, the police come to your home and take away your guns, that could help prevent suicides. I don't want to discount that as having a practical positive effect, but it could also have a negative effect on your mental health if it's not done properly. You know what I mean? Like, And then you have other statutes as well, as you were alluding to earlier, where, if you want to have someone else hold your guns for safekeeping when you're having, mental health struggles and you don't want the guns, you've actively decided you don't want them around you during that time, which can again be a very healthy decision to make. Some statutes can actually hinder that process as well, right?
Yeah, you look at things like transfer laws. I always talk about when I, especially when I'm talking to people in the mental health community, you don't want to create unintentional consequences to these things that you think are helping, right? And I've actually seen where I've talked about transfer laws, and especially like in the state I'm in right now, Nevada. If you came over to my house and you were just like, well, you don't look like you're doing so well. Like, why don't I just remove the firearm? I mean, you step out the door, now we're criminals, right? And you just don't want that to happen. And I've seen it where the light bulb goes off and they're like, there's no good Samaritan clause. And I'm like, no, most of these transfer laws don't have that. Mm-hmm. So once again, you're creating these barrier to entries to get help. For me, anytime you can create time and space between someone and their firearm, because every crisis is temporary, I think that's a good thing. You want to encourage that, right? You want to encourage people to be able to go and drop their firearm off if they're doing, let's not even say it's a crisis. Let's just say, I'm taking a medication and one of the side effects is suicidal thoughts, right? And I'm a responsible gun owner. I got kids in the house. I say, okay, for the next 30 days, I'm going to watch where my head's at while I'm taking these pills. But in the meantime, I just better not have it in the house. Now I get it. A lot of your listeners might be like, why would you do that? You're jeopardizing your safety. But you got to address the problem that's right in front of you. Mm-hmm. And right then and there, it's your headspace. Right. You don't want to add to the numbers of negative outcomes because of something. And I think that if we have more opportunities, and this is what I keep trying to bang on the door of the mental health community to say, like, let's not create these barriers to entry. Let's be inviting to let people police themselves or each other in the community. Let's not punish somebody because, Stephen went out and got Mike's guns out of the house while he's going through his divorce. This is all temporary. This will all pass. And that's what you got to do is create time and space. And yes, there are so many more deadlier ways. Like if you stand in front of a train, that's a pretty much guarantee you're a goner. Or jumping off like the Golden Gate Bridge. Those exist. But we're talking about something that is readily accessible right then and there.
Yeah. And to be fair, is the most common means for committing suicide in the United States. It's not as though this is a rare way that people commit suicide, just to be, that's just reality of America. And that no need to, we don't need to pretend it's not, because that doesn't help anyone either. Now, obviously there's going to be very different strategies for reducing that tendency. And certainly, like, another criticism of red flag laws is that just removing someone's firearms is not really fixing the problem if they're having suicidal ideation, because it's not the only way, obviously, that somebody can carry out those thoughts. And so, it is important to keep in mind that you need to take, a holistic approach to someone's mental health. And it's not just about removing one of the means of taking your life. What you want to do is obviously get that person the counseling they need to bring them out of that space. But it is, like you said, important to keep in mind that while they're in that headspace, it probably is better for many people to not be around firearms, to be able to, with their consent, and perhaps in extreme cases without their consent, that's obviously always going to be controversial. But in cases where they consent, they should have options to have their firearms removed temporarily, stored with a friend, stored, in a lockbox somewhere they trust. I know there's some programs that will do that actually as well, but I think it's important to be realistic about this conversation, because it doesn't help anyone to just pretend like having suicidal ideation and having a gun is a perfectly fine mix, right?
Yeah.
We want to come up with realistic approaches to reduce the likelihood of a negative outcome from that. And I guess that's where, though, there's a significant disagreement with people in the gun space, gun owners, people in the industry, and gun control advocates who obviously also talk about this issue extensively and tend to focus on solutions that effectively make it harder to obtain guns in the first place for everyone. There have been some studies that show lower gun suicide rates in states that have gun licensing laws, for instance, purchase licenses, and really just restrictions that make it more difficult to obtain firearms generally. Although it's even that, if you look at the Rand Corporation review of studies, it's stronger evidence than some of the other outcomes for these laws that have been claimed, like reducing crime, but it's still relatively moderate evidence. But the focus there on the gun control side is, I guess this is sort of obvious, but is controlling guns to get at the root of this problem. Whereas, your focus is that's not your focus, right? Just general restrictions on firearms. Instead, you're looking at how to improve mental health access and training for professionals as well.
Yeah, I think that there's I'm going to circle back to red flag laws.
Mm-hmm.
I think gun owners are a little smarter than that, right? They look at the red flag laws and they go, you're going to take my firearm, but you're not going to take the rope out of my house. You're not going to take the medication. You're not going to drain the pool. You're not going to take the door off the garage, right? You're not even going to take my car away, which is a way I could also do something tragic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the worst part about the red flag laws is they're very insincere. And then the path to rights restriction is very difficult. So it's easy to take them, but then getting them back is a whole different ballgame. And in many cases can take over a year,
Mm-hmm.
And who's making those assessments or those judgments on what qualified you for that red flag? I mean, there's so many horror stories. We don't want to do anything that controls. We don't want to tell anybody what to do. We feel like if you give people the options to make the decisions to find the help they need, they're going to take advantage of that as long as they know it's okay. At least most of the gun owners that I interact with or come through the website. I think it just needs to be readily available and it needs to come from a trusted source, right? People always say like, what's the, I was meeting with the VA last week and I said, gun shops is where many people go. I used to call it the white man's barbershop back in the day when I first started in the gun industry. Now it's everybody's barbershop, right? Because you have all these like amazing demographics that are coming up and getting into firearms. If anyone ever goes to a gun shop, you walk in and there could be 8 people in there that have no intention of buying anything, but they're just there to hang out and talk to the guys behind the counter or talk to each other. Right.
Yeah, I do that too.
So,
honestly.
Yeah, right. I mean, we've all done it. For me, like that's where the good information needs to be passed. That's where people need to find the resources, right? Like if I buy a box, and this is a plug obviously for Arms Corps, but this ties into what we're saying. If I buy, some Arms Corps ammunition and they have get a free and anonymous mental health screening at WTTA.org/love, which is our mental health screenings. I'm going to trust that Arms Corps is not going to get me in trouble. Like they're not going to try to get my gun taken away. They're going to pass good information that's going to help me, and the resources on there that direct me to are going to actually be beneficial. So that's what we want to do. We don't want to create any unintentional consequences to stop people from getting help. We want to get people help, and we want to get people help early. Not at stage 4. Like I want people to be on top of it. And I think the gun industry can do that. I think we can get to where the alcohol industry got with DUIs, because nobody's blaming Johnny Walker for any tragic event, like when someone gets behind the wheel and does something stupid. We can get there. We don't have to be the tobacco industry, where they ended up forcing us to do stuff. We can do it. And then at the same time, we can fight just as hard for our Second Amendment rights.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the bottom line, it sounds to me like, what you guys are doing is attempting to build trust with those who are struggling uh, in ways that isn't really possible for someone outside of the gun owning community or the gun industry to do really. Um, and that's a big key to perhaps reaching those people because like we said, there are reasons why they might not trust any clinician they walk into off the street, or they the mental health professional they Googled or whatever, they might not fully trust that person, and they have these concerns that non-gun owners might not have, right? About going to visit, someone to talk about their mental health struggles, and so that you guys are filling a role that seems very important to me, to make people understand that there are options, and that the concerns they have may be legitimate, about why they don't speak out, but there are ways to mitigate those concerns, right?
Yeah, it's 100%. And just to put a stamp on everything you said, which is totally accurate, it's also, I love, I was when I owned Eagle Imports, I couldn't stand it when employees would come to me and point out problems without offering a solution. It could have been a silly solution. I just needed a solution attached to, hey, I see this problem, because everybody could see those problems. And one of the things that I love about this too is that I love that, and no one's asking. I mean, no, I guess people outside of the gun industry would ask us to do something, but no one's expecting it from us, right? So I love going into these rooms and showing them what we do as the firearms community to address these issues, and watch the look on a lot of faces, right? Because they're like, oh my God, like, you got this card's going into the boxes of firearms, and there's firearms companies stepping up and doing this and supporting that. I love that, right? And I think that's how we win. I know, they're on the forefront, on the front line, the battle with, those that are pro 2A and those that are against it or want to change it. That's a hardcore fight, right? What I think we're doing here is laying like a foundation, and we're kind of slowly changing a belief system that others had of us. And I'm okay with that. You know what I mean? Like I need the guy next to me who's like pry for my gold dead hands. Like I totally do. But I also like being there as that other option. It's like, well, I can't talk to that guy, but I feel like I can talk to you, and I like what you guys are doing. And then that creates that opportunity for us to develop a relationship. And, I feel like eventually you're going to get to where you're going to rethink the way you think about firearms if you have a bad taste in your mouth when you deal with Walk Talk America, just because of the way we approach things. We're not going to back silly legislation. That's a non-starter. But the thing is like, do you really want to save lives? If you do, then you're really going to like what we do, and you're going to be able to get behind it. And then you're going to start thinking like that, right? What's happening now, what we've had for the last 10 years, it's not working. It's just not working, right? We're seeing more suicides by firearm. Like that's going up. Mm-hmm. If restriction worked and legislation worked, because now we have more legislation and restriction than ever, on a federal level, right? Like you would see a decrease, and we're just not seeing that. So we got to get creative. And that's something that, we always look at, like, what can we all work on together? And those being creative and getting out of the box is something that we can work on together, as long as you just throw the restriction thing out the window. I don't think that has to be the end all be all. And I'm with you, right? I agree. Like you can anecdotally probably look to certain instances, just like we can anecdotally do that all day with on the same subject, just different side of the fence on where people stand at guns. We could look at people and say, well, what about this instance? Yeah. There's a waiting period. Has it saved somebody's life? Probably, maybe, right? But does it infringe on other people's right to get firearms? And can we use examples where that waiting period may have gotten somebody killed? I can bring those up, right? I just think let's do stuff that makes sense and everybody can get behind. And that's really where I feel like Walk Talk America's at.
Yeah, certainly. And so, most importantly, what you're doing has potential to save lives. I think that is the the key takeaway and the strategies that you guys have come up with to do that. They make a lot of sense to me. I hope that they're successful in the long run, that they're going to help reduce the number of people we lose to suicides each year. Because, just like you, I've personally suffered a loss in that way, somebody that I cared deeply about, and who didn't, didn't realize that perhaps in that moment, how many people cared about him. And, that's unfortunately something a lot of people go through, and it's important that they get the help to realize how important their lives are to those around them. And so speaking of that, how can people reach out who might be in a crisis, or even just somebody who wants to, get on the track to mental health, to better mental health, long term? As you've spoken about here, you don't have to wait until you're in crisis to take advantage of these resources. What's the best way for somebody to reach out to you guys?
So you can go to WTTA.org, or you can go, if you want to take a screening, which I recommend people do. I tell my friends all the time. I told my own daughter to do it one time, and it changed her life because she found out she only had mild anxiety. Right? Like, it made her feel so much better. And then she had a totally different mind frame of how she felt about her anxiety. So I tell people all the time, go to WTTA.org/love, take a screening. You don't have to be in crisis for it. If you want to find us on social media, it's at Walk the Talk US. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and we're pretty responsive. So if you have a question or you want to get a hold of us, you can either do it through the website or you can do it through social media. And besides that, we do have a podcast, the Guns and Mental Health Podcast, where we tackle subjects that are kind of out of the box, right? We'll have mass shooting survivors on. We'll have people that use their firearm in defensive situations, paramedics, first responders. We even had Tupac's bodyguard's wife on. And like, just to give you an example of how interesting that story was, after Tupac died, his bodyguard basically walked around the world, with the weight of the world on his shoulders, because in his world, it was on his watch that Tupac was shot and killed. A lot of people don't think about, you talk about the trauma bomb that goes off, right? When Bob and Bill, like my friend, the trauma bomb that went off was horrific. And he ended up taking his life with a firearm because he wouldn't go get help, because he was a bodyguard and he didn't want to lose his right. He was an ex-Marine and didn't want to lose any of his rights. He ended up taking his life. We had his wife on the show, and she was able to talk about what it's like to live with somebody who you can't help because they're afraid, right? Like, so we have all these different outlets for people to learn stories and educate themselves. So WTTA.org, I know I got a little long-winded there, but you can go check out.
No, it's important for people to hear.
Yeah. So
absolutely. But we appreciate you coming on the show, and we'll have to have you on again soon.
No, I appreciate you. Thank you for having me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the weekly news segment. I'm here, of course, with Reload founder Stephen Gutowski. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing all right. How are you, Jake?
I'm doing pretty good. You got a interesting piece on the site this week, a feature about this promising young shooter out in California who's facing some difficulties because of a recently passed gun law that has had the unintended consequence, or perhaps intended, depending on who you ask, of kind of dampening her progress in shooting sports. If you want to tell us a little bit about what you found.
Yeah. So we've got a story about Lola Fitzgerald, who's a 16-year-old champion shooter. She does skeet and trap shooting out in California, and she's won a number of titles in the state and outside the state. And her father, Jay, said she's consistently ranked in the top 10 female youth shooters in the country. So she's this great prospect. She's got a lot of potential moving forward in her life. She wants to become an Olympic shooter someday, like six-time Olympian Kim Rhode, who is the only American, the only summer Olympian to have medaled in 6 consecutive Olympic Games. So she's rather accomplished. Three golds, a silver, and two bronze medals for Kim Rodian. So that's who Lola Fitzgerald wants to be like. But unfortunately, AB 2571 is this new restriction on advertising to minors, anyone under the age of 18, about firearms in sort of any way. It's written very broadly. So in practice, what's happened is all of the shooting leagues, or nearly all of the shooting leagues in California, have shut down now for youth shooting. And you've had even competitions and events outside of California are no longer advertising to those inside of California because of this law, which carries, by the way, a $25,000 fine for every infraction. And so people are very concerned about where this is headed, and it's effectively shut out Lola from the shooting sports altogether right now. And it's basically crushing her dream to become an Olympic shooter. She's had interest from colleges since she was in the 8th grade. She's a junior in high school now. She has 2 years left before she graduates. And if she's not able to communicate with the colleges about their shooting programs, she won't be able to obtain a scholarship, which is a more common thing now that you see for women's shooting programs on college campuses. A lot of them are scholarship programs. And it's having this very severe effect on this young woman's ability to follow her ambitions.
Yeah. No, the chilling effect, as you pointed out in the piece, has been severe, not just in California, but as you pointed out in neighboring states. Her family explored potentially looking to compete in neighboring states like Arizona. And because this law is so vaguely and broadly written, even those places are not wanting to get involved with a potential $25,000 fine. You reached out to the governor's office to see if was this his intent to chill all shooting sports, and what did you find out when you talked to Newsom's office?
Yeah, so the governor's office is saying that they don't read the bill this way. They don't read the law as requiring shooting leagues or training to stop communicating with youth shooters. But again, when you read the actual statute and how basically everyone is reading it, that doesn't seem to actually be the case in practice. And when I asked if the governor would support an amendment to the law to clarify it, or repeal, they did not respond. So Governor Gavin Newsom, who's a Democrat, who's obviously one of the leading gun control advocates in the country, who's signed a myriad of new gun restrictions, since the Supreme Court filed its opinion in the Brewing case. It's been sort of a backlash from governors like Gavin Newsom and Kathy Hochul in New York to that ruling, where they've just kind of laid on a lot of new restrictions as a kind of doubling down against what the court is trying to do. So I don't, he says that this is not what they view the law as intended to do, but I don't know that his understanding of the intentions of the law really matter all that much in real life. Unless he's going to support amending the law to clarify these things, because it is written very broadly. It's, it says firearm industry member, but that's defined to be as broad as anyone who is involved with, even just a person involved with an event where firearms are used. So you can see why the shooting leagues are concerned, or even perhaps like any camp that teaches kids how to shoot as part of their offerings could be affected by this law. And basically, they can't advertise or market to anyone under 18 in California anything about guns or gun-related products. So even shooting vests designed for kids you'd be a $25,000 fine if a shooting league sent out any sort of communication with an 18-year-old or anyone under 18 that talks about, any equipment that they might want to use. And so, it's extremely broad, and it applies to anyone who's trying to communicate to anyone under 18 in California. So it's goes beyond groups that are based in California to anyone
Right.
who is whose messaging is entering into California. That's why you've seen some shooting leagues shut down, basically block their websites from California residents. And so, whatever the governor might say he understands the law to be, what it actually is in practice is pretty clear at this point. There's really not much. I suppose he's arguing that these groups are overreacting, but I mean, it's a $25,000 fine for every infraction. So if your newsletter about your shooting league goes to 1,000 kids, well, you're bankrupt real fast.
I was going to say, you could see why these organizations or businesses would not be reassured by statements like that, especially when he won't commit to clarifying amendment in the law. And as you pointed out, he's expressly kind of taken up the gun issue in particular as sort of a culture war totem as of late, particularly after the Bruin decision. All of this whole advertising to minors thing kind of kicked off when he elevated this AR-15 style 22 rifle that no one really knew about until he decided to make it a big issue. As some evil thing. The JR-15, that's right. That the gun industry was marketing weapons of war to minors. You and I are pretty plugged into the gun space. Were you even aware of this weapon before the governor made it a big deal?
I was, because I saw their booth at SHOT Show and I thought, oh, that's going to be something that is going to piss off a lot of gun control.
And you were
people,
right.
which is what happened. And that's what it was designed to do, frankly. The gun's not anything special, really. Smith & Wesson has been making a 22 version of the AR for decades, I believe now. And but it doesn't have that sort of provocative, jokey advertising with the skull and crossbones and a pacifier. The governor of California was so upset about. But of course, the problem is that this law doesn't just ban those cheeky ads or whatever you want to call them. Even if you find them to be particularly outrageous in good faith, this law does way more than ban the advertising of those guns. So, and it's effectively wiped out youth shooting sports in California to this point. And, the gun rights groups all agree with this interpretation of the law. They say, the governor can say what he wants, but it's not how the law is written. Right. And so there've been groups that have sued. We've got the California Rifle and Pistol Association, the Second Amendment Foundation, I believe, California Gun Foundation
Rights
is
Foundation,
also, yeah. And so a number of groups have already sued over this law. They're seeking a preliminary injunction on, and there's a hearing on August 21st for that. Alan Gottlieb, the founder of the Second Amendment Foundation, told me, that he believes this law is blatantly unconstitutional, that it's a parallel to another law that they had challenged back in 2014 and successfully got thrown out, or successfully got declared unconstitutional, there was a ban on advertising by gun stores, even on their own premises. Basically, you couldn't say that you sold guns or the prices of them, and you couldn't put up signs in your windows, that sort of thing. And that did get thrown out. Now, in that case, though, the law survived for about 4 years. Preliminary injunction was not granted in that particular case, and the summary judgment wasn't issued until 2018. So if that's what happens in this, that's one of the dangers here, is that this law may well be declared unconstitutional, probably on First Amendment grounds more than Second Amendment grounds, honestly. But if it takes 4 years, that's too late for someone like Lola, because she's got 2 years left of high school. If she's not able to compete, if she's not able to talk to colleges about their scholarship programs for women's shooting sports, I mean, she's going to have a very hard time of getting a scholarship and continuing to improve her skills to make the Olympic team one day. I mean, she's been invited to multiple Olympic development camps to this point, but if she can't go to those things, if she can't compete, if she can't get coaching, it's going to be much harder for her to achieve that goal. And, that's the real danger here, is that even if this law does get struck down eventually, it could be too late for someone like Lola.
That's right. Yeah, we'll have to keep an eye on that preliminary injunction hearing. And of course, you can look to the Reload. We'll be reporting on the results of that for sure.
Absolutely. But we want to try something new here, a new segment, just a little bit of a personal update, just talk a little bit about what we've been shooting or doing lately. Sometimes I'll do this on the members newsletter. By the way, if you're not a member yet, you should consider joining, and you'll get those members newsletters on Sundays. You'll get access to exclusive analysis pieces and extra reporting. Like this week, we had an entire piece with Chuck Mitchell, who's the head of the California Rifle and Pistol Association. We talked to him about his view on what the governor is doing there and how he's taking this sort of overload strategy of passing a lot of questionably constitutional laws, and the gun groups are having to file cases. He said they're up to nearly a dozen active cases right now against California gun laws. So you check that out, by the way, if you're a member or join today to read it. But sometimes I give members personal updates on what's going on. We're not reviewers. There's a lot of great places you can go online, especially on YouTube, to get gun reviews. But we like to talk about. We're gun owners, shooters. I have a concealed carry license, and I'm a certified firearms instructor for the NRA's basic pistol course. So, we like to talk about guns at least. Right. And one interesting thing, by the way, Jake, is recently my girlfriend has become interested in getting a firearm and carrying it. She had someone make comments to her while made comments to her while she was walking back to her house recently, and that made her very uncomfortable. As you might imagine, she's very small. She's 4 foot, like 11, a small frame. And so she carries pepper spray, and she does, she takes precautions, but she's interested in getting a gun and carrying it. And one of the issues I think we've run into is like, I'm 6'1", like 260 pounds. And so for me, something like the SIG P365 is a really small gun.
Right.
Like it's tiny, super easy to conceal. And I wear clothes with belts and t-shirts that are not super tight. Like your common man wardrobe, as people could probably make out on the YouTube videos. And so it's fairly easy for me to just conceal in an inside the waistband holster, and I could probably carry a full size gun and be fine concealing it. But for her, it's a lot harder.
Right.
We've found like the 365 is small for a subcompact 9mm, but it's still fairly big for someone her size wearing like tighter fitting clothing. And,
I was gonna say that's the hang up. My girlfriend has a 365 as well, and she tries to carry it sometimes, but the tighter fitting clothing is where you're on it. Like you said, you and I might wear jeans and a t-shirt and we'll be fine, but those tighter fitting women clothing present a problem when it comes to printing for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I don't know, I've been trying to work through this and watching videos and talking to friends. And I obviously I welcome more advice from any ladies listening who've gone through the same experience. Obviously she could wear different clothing, I hope, but that kind of sucks as a solution, right? I was thinking maybe she could choose different guns depending on the outfits, but that's not a perfect solution either, because then you have to train with multiple kinds of guns. But I don't think there's going to be a perfect solution in her case, of course. And then, of course, she works in DC and takes Metro to get there. So that complicates things a lot because DC bans concealed carry on Metro, even if you have a permit. She doesn't have any permits yet. So we're one of the really interesting things, though, in this whole process is we came across a new class nearby at a store called Dominion Defense in Northern Virginia here. And they're now offering all three of the permit classes at once. So Virginia, Maryland, and DC all at once for $300, which is a great deal because you could spend that much on just the DC training that's required. And it's just kind of surreal too for me because I've lived here for about a dozen years, and it was never realistic that you could get all three of those. And I mean, DC became realistic a couple years ago. And then now Maryland is because of Bruin. And so it's just kind of fascinating. So I'm going to do this class with her. I mean, I have a Virginia license, but I can realistically legally carry in Maryland and DC now. And perhaps in the whole country at some point soon, which is really pretty surreal. Right.
Came across the post-Bruin landscape in the flesh. First time coming across the concrete effects of that law. It is weird because, every gun owner knows you don't even try in Maryland, right? For the longest time, it was just like it was out of reach, and it's wild to see for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like, and obviously I know intellectually that was possible now.
Right.
But I don't know, you just kind of in person, it takes a little while for it to click in your head. And it took this class coming, to my attention for that to really connect because plus like the way they teach that class all at once, like makes it way more realistic to do it too. Right. Because if you do the Maryland class and the DC class and the Virginia classes all separately, because they all require different training.
Right.
That takes, that makes the bill add way up to be able to actually get those permits. But if you can take them all at once, they have supplemental, sections for each of the different standards. But that really changed my outlook on it. And it's like, wow, here's where the rubber meets the road for this Supreme Court decision. Like I'm actually seeing it in my real life,
right?
Instead of just writing about it. So it's been pretty fascinating. But we're gonna, we're planning on taking that class once my girlfriend's done with a class she's doing for work right now, and I think that's going to become a really popular option in this area, because I mean, you really need that DC permit and Maryland permit if you're going to carry there because they're not going to mess around with you.
Right.
And so, but I'll be watching out there. There's also a new SIG 365 that just came out, the X Macro or something that looks really interesting. Mm-hmm. And didn't you just get a new gun?
Yeah, I traded in I had the old Shield 2.0, the Smith & Wesson that I carried for a couple of years. And I'm a little late to the game, but I finally traded it in for the Shield Plus because I, figured I'd join the new subcompact revolution where they all have 10 plus rounds now. So I finally traded it in and got it and shot it for the first time a couple weeks ago. And it's great. It's a huge upgrade and it's reassuring to know that you have, with the flush magazine, 10 rounds minimum. So it's been great to add that to my carry arsenal.
Yeah, I started with a Shield when I was first carrying. I started with a 40 caliber Shield with a manual safety.
Oh, geez.
Which is, oh boy, that was not a very well shooting. It wasn't a very smoothly. The recoil on that was very snappy.
I was going to say, especially in 40,
it wasn't great. But yeah, then now I carry a Springfield XDS, the 4.0, the longer barrel. But so yeah, I really need to upgrade too. Frankly, I have a 365. I bought a 365 when they first came out. Which was the problem because when they first came out, they had significant issues with light primer strikes they had a lot of issues with the striker assembly not being quite up to snuff. But But yeah, so I've replaced the striker assembly, and I'm still getting light primer strikes on that 365. So I have to send it back to SIG actually. But I really want to move up to 365 XL. They've ironed out a lot of these problems now,
Right.
As far as I can tell from everyone else reviewing them the last couple of years, which is the same. Like the Shield had issues when it came out.
Yeah.
The XDS had issues when it came out. A lot of these subcompacts, they take a couple of years to iron out all the bugs, which is not great, right? Not a great industry practice.
Right.
Guns shouldn't be like video games.
Right.
I don't want to have to download an update to fix the trigger.
Especially guns specifically marketed
concealed carry
as defensive firearms. Exactly.
Exactly. So, not a great trend in the industry, I think.
Yeah.
But one that has happened nonetheless. So maybe when a brand new model comes out, like if it's a variation like this new SIG 365X macro, which by the way, like the SIG really put the full court press on pushing that to all the influencers, because I've seen it all over my feeds, all over YouTube.
All over YouTube.
Everyone at once had it, had a review of it, which is even more so than normal, I think, for a new gun. Everyone loves it, so I'll have to see what it's like. But that's less of a concern, I think, because it's just a slight variation on what they've already had as a gun. But if you get a brand new gun, like maybe the Hellcat or something, although I haven't heard the same kind of issues with Hellcat, so I don't know if that had any really bad problems when it first came out. But that's where I get more concerned. If it's a brand new model, the quality assurance and the early runs, I'm not too confident.
Right. It's a little shaky
anymore after these last decade or so of gun development. But I'm confident that they will eventually fix them.
Yeah.
But I don't, and my experience with the P365, I think mine was like a 2018 run. Like it's like one of the second runs they ever did. Not great. Never could carry it because I get a light primer strike every 50 rounds.
Not exactly reassuring for carry.
So, and I've tried to fix it myself and haven't had success. You clean out the striker channel and it'll work for a while, but it always goes back. Even with a new striker assembly, I thought that would fix it too, but nope, I'm going to have to send it back to SIG and maybe they'll fix it or replace whatever they're going to do. But either way, I need to upgrade mine too. And we still need to, anyone who's got advice on what my 4'11" girlfriend could more realistically carry, please let me know. But that's it for this week. Thank you guys so much for joining us. If you made it this far, please go and rate the show on whatever podcasting app you're listening to it on. Give it a like on YouTube, subscribe, do all those things. They help us immensely. And the best way to help us is by buying a membership. That's how we make all of our money. That's how the Reload is able to operate. It is only through the support of our members. So please consider picking up a membership today over at thereload.com, or just, join the newsletter. The free newsletter goes out every Friday. You get a great overview of gun news in the country for the week. Quick overview. You don't have to spend 20 hours a week just to keep up with the gun news. You just read our newsletter and you'll be well informed, I promise you. And you can get a taste of how we operate before you make the dive into membership. But that's it. We'll see you guys again next week.